It's a Sunday morning. I don't even know. End of September here. We're getting close to. I'm set up here in the bedroom because it's the only spot I have right this second. And I figured I'd come in and just try to update this. I really do feel like writing, but I don't have a laptop right now that's available to me. I have thoughts that come into my head all through the week about things that I would like to put it on paper, like essays or things that I would like my kids to know or whatever. And a lot of times I just don't have a laptop available, or writing by hand is possible, but it's also old timey and it takes more time. But this morning I've been thinking about, I don't know, I guess in terms of recent events, there's been a lot of things that have happened recently. And I can't say that life is bad. Jessica and I are still in therapy, although I'm not sure it's doing us much good. I don't really know. We had a conversation a couple nights ago, and I asked her, I don't even remember what the context of it was, but I asked her if she'd ever been convicted of sin. And her answer was no. It kind of surprised me. You know, I don't know what that means. It's hard for me to think about how I could be a Christian if I wasn't engaged in the conflict that the Bible talks about in terms of my own nature and the world and Satan. But in context of sin, really like the things in me that need to change, or the things that God would have a problem with, or that slow us down, or that creates a barrier. And so it was a little weird to hear that, although it's something I always was aware of. You know, um, I told Jessica years ago that I almost wish that she would do something majorly stupid, which is a crazy thing to say, just to put her in touch with her own, just to kind of shock her awake to the point that she needs to change too. You know, it's not all about focusing on me and hoping that I change. But that's not the first time that I've wondered if we are unequally yoked, in the sense that in terms of our faith, in terms of our mission. There's a lot of things. I'm 50 years old. I just had my 50th birthday a couple weeks ago. And one of the things that I was thinking is that a lot of the stuff that I thought that I would do later, or that my life would look like, that I would shoot for, could not have happened without a change in her. Just by virtue of the fact, and this is scriptural, like it says that when Paul is somewhere is telling people to be careful about getting married, but he brings up the idea that when you're married, you have to be concerned about your spouse. Like, you have to be concerned about their wants and needs. You can't just be concerned about the wants and needs of the Lord. And of course, there's a balance there, because Jesus said, anyone who doesn't, by virtue of his love for me, hate his father and mother and brothers and sisters and all that, So there's a balance in terms of following Christ, that we ultimately always choose him. But that's not what's been the barrier in my marriage. But I started to see how recently, like, for example, adoption. We talked about adoption when we were younger. That could never have happened because our marriage we've never been on the same page marriage wise. So even if we had adopted someone, it probably would have hastened our divorce, or the stress of all that. Probably would have, and also even like ministry. That's one of the things that I thought that I would be doing. I thought I'd be in full-time teaching, ministry, speaking to especially men. That's kind of where my heart is after, especially young men, talking to them. and just sharing the truth of God, not my own wisdom. But I thought I'd be doing that full time in some kind of capacity. And I realized not too long ago that really couldn't have happened because my wife wasn't ever on the same page as me. And she can't see this. This is something that I've tried to talk to her about, but she can't see it, you know. She can't see the ways that her. So I've been saying the same things for almost 30 years in our marriage. Specifically, you know, that her trauma that she suffered from at the hands of her father was affecting our marriage in real ways. And it was affecting um, not just our sex lives, but everything. Just, so like when I say, if I say I want to go here, she says I want to go there. It's always an argument. Everything's an argument. And especially the important stuff, the crises, the times when uh, we really need a unified front. We haven't had one, and our kids picked up on it. And so I don't think I understand the origin of where the problem comes from, in her family of origin, and not being listened to, not being regarded, besides the trauma, just not having a voice to express her emotions. And I understand all that. I get where it's coming from. But she doesn't seem to get how that has affected our marriage. And she's only just recently, in the last year or two, started to look at these things, I kind of had a jump on her in terms of, I went to school for human services. I was studying counseling and empathy and just all those things. That's how I got started in life. And for her, it's new. She just recently started and came out of her denial and started realizing, hey, I'm part of this. I'm part of the problem here. For most of our lives together, she thought I was the problem, and that if I would just change, everything would be rosy. And so, anyways, and on top of that, so on top of the personal reasons, there's our culture, which is over the top, hysterically feminized. I mean, the whole world is a woman's world in terms of where I live, here in America. Everything is aimed at and more controlled by women, and it is just getting worse and worse and worse because there's not a balance. I heard someone talking about the nurturing nature of women, which is how God created women, and I'm thankful for it. It's not bad. But it's bad if it's not counterbalanced, if the masculine isn't also involved and there. And so, for example, just from a couple days ago, there was a picture on Facebook of a mugshot of an 18-year-old black guy who murdered somebody. And the black women, especially the older black women in the comments, were like, "Oh, this is someone's baby." Speaking of the perp, speaking of the guy, the murderer, this is someone's baby, and I just pray for him and his family and the victims and their families. But none of y'all has a right to judge him, and none of y'all should be on here commenting with your judgments. And that's a good example to me of toxic femininity, or maybe femininity that's just gone too far, in the sense that all the woke stuff, what women are about is the relationships. And so if you say something that hurts people's feelings, you need to be silent. You need to shut up and stop saying those things. And what men would focus more on would be competency, responsibility, accountability, the stuff that a dad does to help prepare his kids for the world, for life in the real world. Justice, law. And these are not women's interests by and large, speaking generally. You know, it's the relationships that matter. And our whole culture is suffering because we have cast out not only God, but the masculine attributes that are needed. And we've called them toxic. And so our world is just swimming in confusion and all of that. I'm saying all that because it's affected my marriage, you know, because it's impossible for my wife to live in this, and daughters to live in this sort of a chamber where all this stuff is echoing around all the time, and no one is saying this is we've gone wrong. Like we've gone past a certain point where we've lost touch with the masculine in our society. So there was something that happened a couple weeks ago. This young girl on a train in Charlotte was stabbed by a black guy. His color doesn't matter. What matters is there was two things. He had been he had a criminal history. He'd been arrested and let go 14 times, and he's out there on the street. And that was the first thing. And then the second thing was that after she was assaulted and stabbed in the neck, all these people, including 3 men and a bunch of women, and they just happened to be black. I mean, it is what it is. No one helped her. No one rushed to her to try to stanch the bleeding or try to, help her. And the guy who did the stabbing just got off the train, and I think that bears questioning. What's happened? What's happened in our culture that someone, because as a man, what I saw was I wanted to rush in. I wanted to protect this girl. She's innocent. And I think a lot of men sort of got galvanized when they saw the pictures and everything afterwards of this girl cowering and in fear and shock and terror. It's just an example of, like, we should be asking questions. How come no one helped? How come no one jumped in? What's happened to our society? That we've lost our sense of humanity. And so it's all there. It's in the culture. The culture is suffering because men have been sidelined or have given up. That's the other side of it. They've just decided there's no point in all this. I'll just be Peter Pan and I'll play video games and work my job and be left alone. I can see the appeal to that, honestly. But the point is, this sort of zeitgeist and the spirit of the age has affected my marriage. And my wife can't see it. So the question I ask myself is, can I live with that? Can I live the rest of I'm 50. I've been married to her since I was 21. And can I continue? Right now she's at church, so she just kind of, and I don't begrudge her from social connections, but it's just another point of separation that's out of many. There's just all these separations, and it can be hard to find the common ground, especially when, like, I want to talk about the Bible or something and she gets defensive about it. And I get why. I understand, the most important man in your life violated your trust, and you kind of grow up and have with this sense that I need to protect myself, But the way that comes out in marriage is that anytime I say something, the first response is, well, let's question that, So I didn't have someone that in my life, in terms of who I married, who was a help to me, who was helping me. I had someone that wanted to fight me all the time. And it's sad and it's tragic because it's really not her. It's not like I blame her. I'm not angry at her for these responses. They make sense to me, but they are mine to deal with. You know, it's led to a sense of like a loneliness. So I've thought like recently, what can I do? How can I make connections? You know, it's hard for me because I'm smart. You know, I see things that other people don't see. So right off the bat, it's hard sometimes to make connections with people, especially if you want to talk about stuff that's really important. You know, that's not just surface level. But I need some connection, and in my own life, I've realized that I've allowed all these things around me, you know, my wife, the unfairness of it. And it's okay to say it's unfair. It's not fair. It hasn't been fair. But I've allowed all that to knock me off balance in terms of my relationship with God, in terms of the mission, the sense of mission that I used to have, the sense of passion I used to have. And I've realized that I need to make changes. You know, I need to get back to God's Word, God's presence, the sense of excitement and discovery that I had when I was younger. And a lot of that was because when I was married in my first years, the marriage was so terrible that it drove me. And I've almost gotten used to how terrible it is, so I'm not really being driven the way I was. I'm not allowing the circumstances to push me into the realities of God like I did when I was younger. So that's something I need to change. It's been really helpful. I've been listening to a guy named Doug Wilson from Moscow, Idaho, and him and his wife and other people in the other elders in the church are preaching the truth. They're preaching about some of these issues that I've seen for years. I mean, I was saying 20, 30 years ago that the church was a woman's space, and it wasn't a man's space, and something needed to be done. And, you know, just the imbalance. Not that women are bad, but the imbalance. And this guy, Doug Wilson, and his wife are talking about these issues from the standpoint of what the scripture says. And I'm hard pressed to think of a preacher that I've heard recently that is stating the problems and the solutions in such a cogent way in relation to what's going on in the culture. So I've been pretty stoked to listen to some of his stuff. But I would, you know, as I hear the preaching or I hear people, I see like people worshiping and stuff like that. That's what I miss. That's what I am like. I need real life connections. I can't just do the digital thing. How do I find these people? How do I find my people? Well, I guess I'll close to get about my day and seek the Lord.